You're listening to the Overthinker's Guide to Joy, episode 12. This week, we're going to talk about perfectionism. Let's dive in. Hey there, you are listening to the Overthinker's Guide to Joy. This is a podcast for overthinkers, overachievers, perfectionists, type A, stressed out, anxious people who just want to calm down and feel better. I'm your host, Certified Life Coach Jackie DeCrenis. Hey there. So one of my goals with this podcast was to talk about common themes that come up both in my life, but also in all the lives of my clients. And this is one of those themes where I am just obsessed with this topic because I want to convey it perfectly, which of course might defeat the whole point of this episode because today's subject is about perfectionism. Now, I can think about a dozen different people off the top of my head who are thinking, this episode is about me. But it's not. It's about a lot of us, including me. And I have often denied my own perfectionism. I thought perfectionists were other people, artists who knew how to color in the lines, or artists who knew how to draw the lines and then color in the lines. I thought they were the scientists, the people who had the patience to titrate a long organic chemistry experiment correctly in their junior year as a biology major with the hopes of going to medical school. Oh, wait, does that sound incredibly specific? Yes, that was me, except for the part where I titrated something incorrectly and made a mistake on the equation early on in the semester. And then when I got a D in the organic chemistry lab, I thought it was a sign from the universe that I shouldn't go to medical school. And yes, that's a whole different podcast. But I thought perfectionists were the girls who matched their handbags to their shoes and who knew how to put on eye makeup just perfectly. I thought perfectionists were ballerinas and gymnasts and concert pianists. I didn't know that regular folks could be perfectionists too. And since I was not particularly artistic nor musically inclined, nor did I end up going to medical school, I just assumed I wasn't a perfectionist. But I was so wrong. Perfectionists come in all shapes and sizes, and perfectionists tend to want to do things that they will excel at. Ultimately, perfectionists fear disapproval and rejection from those around them, and they're often their own worst critics. The two ends of the perfectionist spectrum are the ones who start a million projects but never finish them for fear of imperfection or being judged. And then they tend to wait till the last minute for deadlines so that they can fall back on the excuse, well, I pulled an all-nighter or I completed the whole thing in one day. So in the perfectionist's mind, this ability to do something Herculean at the last moment protects them from criticism because they can always say, well, if I only had put more effort into it, if I had had more time, then it would have been really great. Well, the other end of the spectrum is to do everything immediately so that you can get credit for always being the first to complete everything. These type of perfectionists often don't want to go back and tinker with their work for fear of admitting that they can't do it better. So by completing every task really quickly and moving on is like an automatic passing grade. Now, that's the two ends of the spectrum, but there's probably another 50 shades of perfectionism in between. I have one client who describes her perfectionism as all or nothing. She's either going to run marathons or she's not going to do any exercise at all. I see that same all or nothing mentality with my weight loss clients. By the time they come to me, they've had a lifetime of yo-yo dieting. Every Monday, they start a new diet, or at least they say they will. They either stick to a very restricted, low-calorie, non-sustainable diet plan, or they binge eat, thus perpetuating their lifetime of yo-yo dieting. I have other clients whose perfectionism results in insomnia, ruminating all night long about the mistakes that they made at work or the next day to come, fearing that they will make mistakes again. And then that cycle leads to, I won't get enough sleep, I won't be sharp enough, that will make mistakes. And so it becomes a vicious loop. I have other clients who feel overcome with emotion or profound sadness or anxiety as they are looking for their next job. But they have terrible fear they won't ever find one, or they're incapable of giving a good interview because they'll never be prepared enough. They were maybe laid off or fired from their last job for some circumstance, and now they've taken that energy into believing that they're not worthy of a next interview or the next job. Perfectionism comes from the need to control things. And this need may have come from some childhood trauma or dysfunction in our upbringing. The common denominators I see are often a result of children of narcissists or alcoholics, drug addicts, or even bipolar behavior. So when the family home lacked consistency, or then there was volatility, and that might be one parent and not the other, the child learns to cope by being a people pleaser and or a perfectionist. So this messaging turns into hard wiring over time. We become so afraid of making a mistake or being judged by the proverbial parent, even if we are, decades away from being children. But we channel it into a form of perfectionism. So when we're younger, perfectionists tend to look like goal-oriented overachievers. The success of being a good dancer, athlete, or student pays dividends, whether it's in the form of awards or money, attention, or some other intangible. And being goal-oriented or achievement-oriented is fantastic. But when it becomes dysfunctional, that is, it's at the expense of regular sleep or normal eating or chronic anxiety, it's simply not sustainable. So the perfectionist turns their achievements into a weapon because they're constantly trying to either do better or live up to their former success. So we're seeing a rise in society for the perfectionist mentality. And the research on this trend is sort of inconclusive. Some people believe it is heightened by social media and the immediacy and curation of other people accomplishing things at a rapid rate, whether that's money, beauty, fame, whatever. But the problem is when the perfectionist has their first, quote, failure, the straight A student gets their first B, or the athlete goes to compete on a bigger stage and gets crushed by the opposition, or the beauty queen who doesn't qualify outside their hometown. It becomes the first crack in the vase. Now, with an achievement-oriented person, they just pick themselves up and try again. With a perfectionist, they tend to either quit everything they've worked for, or they find themselves running to the next thing, or they double down and obsessively try to become the best. And that's okay. Well, not the obsessive part. It's certainly okay to try and do better. It's certainly okay to accept failure. But oftentimes the perfectionist will manifest unhealthy coping mechanisms. So they might turn to drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, gambling, something to sublimate their imperfection while they're trying to attain that perfection in their goal or their particular field. So it takes a long time to unwind the perfectionist mentality and habits. And the coping mechanisms that the perfectionist starts to use become oddly comfortable in their dysfunction, whether that's addiction or just never getting unstuck from their endless procrastination or lack of completion. It's kind of like the old saying, the devil you know. So how do we break the perfectionist cycle? As with any lifetime pattern, there is no overnight solution, but there are steps you can take towards mitigating the pattern. And the first step is like any addiction, admission. Now, some people proudly admit that they are perfectionists, and they wear it as a badge of honor. They think the admission of being a perfectionist gives them a hall pass to not completing things, or not completing things in a timely fashion, or a license to be perpetually anxious, or the license to be a workaholic. But perfectionism is not a virtue, nor is it a mental illness. But when it spirals out of control, it can often collide with mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and OCD. So what's step number 2 after we admit we might be a perfectionist? Try focusing on the positives. Perfectionists tend to focus on what's not working instead of what is. Now, this becomes the proverbial lead balloon for many, or kryptonite, in their progress. And it's what often leads perfectionists to either give up or overwork everything. But by focusing on the things you are doing well will give you buoyancy and keep your momentum going, which is kind of key. Because why perfectionists quit or why perfectionists procrastinate is because they are overwhelmed by their focus on what's not working. And so then they don't give any credit to what is. They lose that buoyancy. They lose the momentum. So what's step 3? Practicing self-compassion. It's okay to make mistakes. Accepting the mistakes as the thing that makes you better will actually help you. Welcoming the errors as an opportunity to learn instead of avoiding them at all costs. It's actually kind of like learning to ski. And I don't love skiing, but I know how. And part of what I don't love about skiing is I'm so afraid of falling. When you learn to ski as a little kid and you learn to fall as part of learning to ski, you develop an acceptance to falling. In fact, if you've ever seen like 3-year-olds learning to ski, they don't ski with poles and they love to fall because they think it's fun and they're very low to the ground and it doesn't hurt. But when you're an adult and you learn to ski, falling can be very painful. It can be very dangerous. It's the fear of embarrassing yourself. It's the fear of hurting somebody else. You have so much going on in your mind. But when you learn to ski as a little kid and you learn to fall as a little kid, the truth is, by avoiding the fear of falling, you actually fall less. But even when you do fall, it's not as catastrophic because you're looser. Your muscles are looser and you accept it. It's the same thing with making mistakes. Letting the mistakes come, letting them be your teacher, then makes you more fluid in your process. You let go of the fear of criticism and you learn to tune out the garden variety criticism, and you learn what is constructive criticism, whether it's your own or someone else's. And when someone else is giving you constructive criticism, it's coming from a place of a common goal to make the work product better. It's not intended to demoralize you, and they certainly don't want you to give up. So practicing self-compassion can be a softer way of approaching a big goal or a difficult chore or even just an artistic project. So what's step 4? Well, step 4 is SMART goals. And SMART goals are different than regular goals. A regular goal might be something like, I want to be rich someday, or I want to be thin, or I just want to be happy. Those are somewhat amorphous and extremely subjective. They can also seem impossible if you've never achieved any of those things. But SMART goals are different. SMART goals are defined as S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for achievable, R is for realistic, and T is for time limited. So rather than saying something like, I want to be thin, you might decide, I want to lose 20 pounds in the next 3 months. This meets all the criteria of a SMART goal. Then you can go about coming up with a strategic plan of how to make this happen, whether that's diet, exercise, hiring a professional trainer, hiring a coach, and doing it in incremental ways. You make a plan 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time. That's how we reach our goals. And that's how we stay on task and avoid that perfectionist tendency of all or nothing. So, step 5, focus on the meaning of the project. Find the joy in it. If it's a creative project, tap into the reason you started the project in the first place. If it's something that you have to do, this can feel like a chore. New York Times bestselling author Charles Duhigg says in his new book, Smarter, Faster, Better, reframe chores as a choice. Figure out what the end game of completing a chore does for you or for someone else. When something's a choice, we tend to keep our motivation higher. He talked about it in terms of like when he was teaching, he hated grading papers. And then what he realized was that by grading papers and taking pride in grading, which felt like a chore, he was then helping his students become better writers, better scientists, better whatever they were doing. And then eventually those students would go off to becoming scientists. They would be able to better communicate in their research papers what they wanted to prove, and that maybe one of his future students would ultimately cure cancer. But that would all be because he took pride in grading their papers and trying to make them better. So the chore then became a choice. So if you can find that methodology in your brain of why this thing that you don't really want to do has some greater benefit for you or for somebody else, it changes your energy around doing it. So as I always say, when we're trying to form new, healthier habits, and certainly letting go of perfectionism, I would qualify as definitely a healthy habit, you have to remember there is no magic bullet. Awareness is the first step to changing a bad habit into a good habit. And the second step is just practice. And I know that's hard. It's super hard for the all or nothing people. But everything we're talking about is just developing a practice, a little bit each day, and it starts with awareness. So if you have a goal or a big project that's due, the best thing you can do is simply work on it a little bit at a time. Schedule your work, and then track your progress and celebrate each step, even the mistakes and the failures, because it means we're learning. But if you don't celebrate the progress, you will lose that motivation. And like everything else, it's going to get stuck or sidelined. So the last thing I want to do is to invite our perfectionists to being perfect at not being a perfectionist. That would defeat the whole point. So let go of that too. And I'm going to leave you with two of my favorite quotes on perfectionism. The first is from the COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg. Done is better than perfect. And the second one is by researcher author Brene Brown. I am a recovering perfectionist. This is my motto, because I am a recovering perfectionist. So I want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. And just remember, practice makes perfect, but we're not looking for perfection. We are just looking for practice. Have a great one, and take care. If you want to learn more tips about managing your stress and how to manage your overthinking brain, just go to my website and sign up for my weekly newsletter at JackieDeCrenis.com. That's JackieDecrenis.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Jackie DeCrenis. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to this episode of Overthinker's Guide to Joy. If you like what was offered in today's episode, I would love you to leave a review and subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts.